You're listening to Frankly Speaking Sports with Larry Frank on Northeast Streaming Sports.
Look at this. Look at you. Wrigleyville is full. It's October 30th, and there's baseball at Wrigley Field for the first time in history. I know we want to thank Theo and Tom and Joe and the team for bringing the World Series to Wrigley Field 2016. And there's one guy in particular I want to sing my ass for, and he's number 3. He's behind the plate. He may retire, but he'll never quit. Mr. David Ross, I'd like to belt this one out for you. It's his last game at Wrigley. Let's sing it for him. Let's sing it with Harry. Come on, Harry. Oh, 1, oh, 2, oh, 3. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Why be some innocent cracker jack? I don't care if I ever go with roots for the copy. If they don't win, it's a shame. For it's 1, 2, 3 strikes you're out at people. We love you, Rossi. Let's take this show to Cleveland. This unforgettable vacation memory. It didn't.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Frankly Speaking Sports. I'm your host, Larry Franken. What an incredible Rays season opening show we have for you tonight. We're just moments away from the pre- and post-game host of the Tampa Bay Rays, Neil Solondz, will be joining us, and then a couple minutes after him, we're going to have the great Dave Wills. So an unbelievable show for you this evening. Lots of questions. We'll get some answers tonight as far as the Tampa Bay Rays go. But before we get to our special guest tonight, want to remind everybody we are over several different platforms: Zodiac TV, Facebook, Twitch, Twitter, Spotify, iHeartRadio, all over the place tonight. So lots of different places to catch us this evening. And, there's nothing like opening week of baseball. Nothing is like opening week except maybe opening day. But other than that, what a great week. We're a couple of days away from the Tampa Bay Rays taking on the Marlins in Miami, 4 p.m. start this Thursday. And what better guy to start it off tonight with us? Let me see if I can get him on this screen for us. There he is, the great Neil Solondz. Neil, how you doing tonight, buddy?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing great, Neil. Doing great. Thank you so much. Neil, let me ask you this. I'm going to check my mic real quickly. Make sure you're on loud and clear here for us. There we go. Okay, good. Neil, it's, ever since we were kids, we're watching, getting ready, gearing up for opening day. Let me ask you, has it changed for you over the years, or do you still feel like that same little kid when we were kids growing up, looking at the projections, seeing what everybody expects each team to do?
I think it's a little different. I definitely think there's butterflies in the stomach and you're excited for the start of the season. I think all of that, especially having gone to the World Series. I don't think there's any reason not to be extremely excited about this team and this organization going into this year. But someone who hosts a pre and post game show every day, you also know that it's not to make too much of one game in the context of a 162 game season. That it is a marathon, and I think especially this year, it's a marathon like no other, only because of everything that we've dealt with over the past year overall in our country and our world.
Now, after, like you mentioned, all the success we had last year, despite the unique year and everything else, are you a little surprised that I take it with a grain of salt what the projectors are saying out there and what they're predicting, but are you surprised that it seems almost 100% of them are picking the Yankees to win the division despite the Rays winning it last year?
I'm not surprised, to be frank. I mean, generally that's the way the national, prognostications are going to. I mean, before last season, they were still picked to finish behind the Yankees, and the year before that, they finished behind the Yankees in 2019, and they're the big market team. So, I think actually from a Rays perspective, it's almost a good place to be. I've seen predictions where the Rays are picked 4th out of 5 teams, which I don't believe in, but that's, let people pick whatever they want. If it's motivation for the guys in the clubhouse, if it helps them, great. I think they're focused on the task at hand. They believe in one another. They believe in themselves, and let's see how the season turns out.
Now, this team is turning into a little more than, the Red Sox have seemed to fall off the last couple of years, but there's a team actually going to be playing real close to us in Dunedin, Florida this year until they get back to Toronto. That's another team that could give fits to both the Yankees and the Rays.
Yeah, and I think Boston's actually improved too. I mean, I think the big question for all these teams, and it's not only for the Rays, the Yankees, the Bucks, the Blue Jays, it's every team in baseball. How are you going to survive a 162 game season? And not knowing how long pitchers are going to be able to go and how many innings you can get out of certain guys. And, I think all of that, and even your position players, they're still going from a 2-month to a 6-month season. Are they physically going to hold up? And if they do, how do their numbers hold up? So I think, most of us are really unsure. And until we get into it, we're not really going to know. And then it's also how can COVID potentially impact, the start of the season. I think we saw recently Matt Barnes, we thought he was going to be held out for a bit, and then it was determined he had a false positive with the Red Sox, and, he's the closer for Boston. So that certainly would have had an impact on their team. So we'll see what happens going forward as to, how many positive cases there are and how it impacts every individual club.
Now, let's talk about our starting pitching. I mean, a lot of questions after what happened last year, obviously losing Charlie Morton, losing Blake Snell, and everybody knows the importance of both of them. But do you think, because you hear a lot of different things, Neil, and you get up close with these guys, but do you think the loss of Snell is magnified a little bit because of that Cy Young award-winning year? Because when you look at Neil, his record as a starting pitcher for the Rays is under 500 if you want to remove that specific year. Do you think Blake is replaceable, or do you think it's going to be a tough thing to do?
Well, I kind of look at this year, it's more about not who are you replacing, but, you got to worry about who you have, because if you worry about who you're replacing, it's very difficult for any athlete to perform. And I think really this year it's about strength in numbers. They're going to begin with 5 guys pitching in length in Tyler Glasnow, Ryan Yarborough, Rich Hill, Chris Archer, and Michael Wacha. But then you've probably got about 7 or 8 guys who could pitch in roles of significance, whether it's Josh Fleming, whether it's Luis Patino, Shane McClanahan, Trevor Richards, Brent Honeywell, Brendan McKay, and on and on. I think strength in number, Joe Ryan probably too, I should mention. I mean, strength in numbers is going to be the key, because again, you don't know how many innings guys can go this year, and the more arms you have, the better. And I think it's really the strength in numbers that are going to determine how good this Rays team is.
And when you look at a Rich Hill and you look at a Chris Archer and some of those guys, how much of a difference can just something like a pitching coach make in a pitcher?
A pitching coach can have a significant impact, but I still think it's up to the athlete to want to have the willingness to absorb what the coach is trying to teach and absorb, and it's getting through. And I think you can have all the tools in the world, but you have to. I think this goes for any person in any environment. There has to be a willingness to learn, and at least the sense I get is that the people that the Rays brought in this year, whether it's via trade or free agency, have been very receptive to learning. So, I think that makes for a really good combination. I think Kyle Snyder and Stan Borowski are really good teachers, but you're only as good as the students that you have and the talent they have. And I think it's a combination of all of the above that leads to production.
Now, Neil, were you surprised, speaking of that the Rays, when Chris Archer left, they had, I wouldn't call it parting words or anything, but it seemed like Chris was happy. He didn't have the greatest things necessarily to say about Tampa. Were you surprised that they went back after Chris Archer?
I don't think there were any hard feelings. I think he wanted to be in a situation where he had a chance to win. And if you remember the year he got traded, the Pirates were in the middle of a playoff race at the time. And the Rays had made a lot of trades that year. Now, they ended up becoming a 90-win team the year that he departed, and everything went on the upswing. And I think Chris always had a good relationship with everybody associated with the Rays. The trade wasn't about anything other than try to better your team short and long term. And Pittsburgh thought at the time it was a good trade for them. Obviously, it's turned out to be an excellent trade for the Rays. And then I think Chris also felt that this was probably the place that he was really, really comfortable. And he has said that multiple times. So that's part of the reason that he wanted to come back, reestablish himself as a major league pitcher, and give him the best chance of succeeding going forward.
Now, Neil, when you have a team like the Rays who are built on so much depth, they have a minor league system that is just incredible. A lot of players close to busting loose to get to the major leagues. And, of course, the team they got on the field. Most people say this is a terrific situation, and it is when you have that depth. But we both know it's only a matter of time before a couple of these players, one of them speaking is Wander Franco, comes up to the major leagues. I mean, what are you looking at from this team, and how do you see them fitting in all these young guys with all that depth that they already have?
Well, I mean, I don't know when or if, most of those guys may or may not come up. A lot of it depends on production. A lot of it depends on how the guys above them are doing. And the thing to remember is there wasn't a minor league season last year. So none of these guys really played in games for a full season. So, you're wondering how those guys are going to hold up, the prospects, that is. And then the minor league season this year is delayed for another month. So you're at least not starting games until May. So, how does that change, how you adjust and look at players? I don't know. I think a lot of what we look at are just, open-ended questions. We hope at some point during the year to get answers. And I know the Rays have a lot of talent, as you've mentioned, in their system, but they've also got a lot of talent on their major league club. And they're going to fill needs however they feel best will help the club for this season as it goes on. And I think, they've got really smart people running it, and that's why they've been so good the last decade and change. And I think that's why they're going to be good for a long time. Now,
Neil, if there's one player that, in your opinion, that needs to definitely get off to a quick start, this year to prove his, stability with the club, who would that player be?
I don't know if needs to get off to a good start for the stability of the club. I would say it would help that individual, to get off to a good start. There's probably a couple. I think Yoshi Tsutsugo, it would probably help him and make it easier on him if he got off to a really good start, just because last year had to be so difficult, learning a new culture, adjusting to a new team, adjusting to Major League Baseball in the United States, all of those things. And the last 2 weeks of spring, he's been terrific. So hopefully that continues. I think it would make the start of the season that much easier. But as we've seen, I've seen players who have a bad month or two, and then they're great for 4 or 5 months. And I've seen guys who have a great first month, and then they're not the same player after that. The other player I think it would benefit to get off to a good start is probably Austin Meadows, because he was so good in 2019. He dealt with COVID in 2020. He had a very good spring overall, especially at the start. It probably would benefit him to get off to a good start, but I don't know that I wouldn't use the word have to. I think when you start using those terms, the Rays are not a team that's going to make a knee-jerk reaction and say, he's had 2 bad weeks, let's make a change. I mean, I think that's kind of the difference between playing in New York or Tampa Bay. There are some guys for whom you might look at a player and say, well, if he doesn't get off to a good start, they're going to make a change. With the Rays, I think the fact that they have been so patient over the years is really the reason that they've been successful in large part, because there isn't that pressure to feel that you have to perform now. I think when you get in those situations, especially when you're playing a 162-game schedule, you're more likely to have struggles than you are successes. And I think the Rays recognize that.
So let me ask you this on the same scenario. You wouldn't feel, and I'm asking this because, like I said, the situations there. Someone like Yandy Diaz, knowing that Wander Franco is in the works, everybody's talking about Wander Franco, if he comes up, possibly being a Rookie of the Year candidate with a Rosarina, who technically is still a rookie. Does that put extra pressure on a player like a Yandy Diaz or an infielder like that?
No, I mean, I don't think so at all. I think they play to play. And especially when the first month there are no games that mean anything. So you won't even know what's going on the alternate side at all. So it's not like you're reading box scores and seeing the guys 20 for 40 or 30 for 50 or putting up ridiculous numbers. And, again, as good as Wander is talent-wise, and he's a tremendous talent, he still hasn't played above A ball. So, are the Rays going to be patient and let him play some AA baseball and let him play some AAA baseball and prove that he has to be at every single level and dominate the level? I don't know. And I honestly don't know, because there was no season last year. How do you judge what a guy did at the alternate site? I'll let people smarter than me figure that out. But I don't. You look at Yandy Diaz's past. He came over from Cuba on a boat several times and risked his life. So, is he going to be worried about another player taking his job? No. I think one of the reasons that Yandy Diaz has had success is because he's so good at blocking out everything but just worrying about what he can control when he's in the box. And I think any successful sports athlete does the same exact thing.
Now, a couple of days ago, terrible news for the Rays. Nick Anderson goes down with the torn ligament in his elbow, out to minimum, they say, the All-Star break. How do you see this bullpen panning out? Do you see them maybe going with a bullpen by committee, or eventually, recognize not something the Rays you maybe necessarily do, but come up with a defined closer for the team?
No, I mean, Nick wasn't the closer. They basically used him in the highest leverage role. If you look at his usage over the 4 months that he pitched for the Rays, 2 months in 19 and 2 months in 20, he had a total of 6 saves. So they always, I compare it to football. They put guys in the best spot. It's almost like a shutdown corner on a certain wide receiver. They put guys in the game when they feel they have the best chance to help the team. And I think they're going to still use their bullpen the same way. What did they end up with? 12 different guys with saves last year, if you counted the postseason. So they didn't have a defined closer last year. So why would they have a defined closer this year? I do think obviously losing a guy like Nick is important. I don't think anyone doubts that. But at the same time, if you look at what he did his 2 months in 19 and his 2 months in regular season in 20, he pitched an average of 9 to 10 innings a month. So that means they need, a handful of guys to pick up an inning or two extra a month, or an inning or two extra of big moments in terms of when they're pitching. So Diego Castillo and Pete Fairbanks will probably remain in high leverage roles. and guys like Chaz Rowe, Cody Reed, Ryan Thompson, Andrew Kittredge will probably all get opportunities to kind of fill that void. Colin McHugh as well, who they got as a free agent. And I think they're going to share the duties just like they have all the way along. And if guys evolve into even stronger positions, then they'll get more opportunities. And the hope is that Nick will be back. And then at some point, you're going to get Oliver Drake too. And if at that point everybody's healthy, you have a really, really deep bullpen.
Now, how do you keep, and how does Kevin Cash keep a guy like Arozarena even keeled with all the success he had last year and all the media hoopla and everything? How do you keep a young guy? Because like we said, he's still a rookie, and he's coming off that unbelievable playoffs where he just went crazy in the playoffs. How do you keep it so that he can go out there and play relaxed?
I don't know that you change anything. I mean, the Rays, a clubhouse environment that by nature is relaxed, that they don't put pressure on certain guys, as long as Randy doesn't, it didn't appear in spring training that he changed at all, that he was still the same guy. He missed a couple games because they said he was doing too much work, but that's his nature. So, I think they learned to manage him in terms of his workload, but, I think the feeling is while he had a great postseason, in the regular season when he was there, he didn't need to carry the team, and he wasn't asked to carry the team. I think they have a fair amount of offense. I mentioned Yandy Diaz. I mentioned Austin Meadows. Brandon Lau was the co-MVP of the team last year. Yoshi Tsutsugo is capable of more than he supplied. I think Joey Wendell is an extremely consistent performer. Manuel Margot had probably the second best postseason on the club last year to Randy Arozarena. And I think Willie Adames is really swung the bat well the last 10 days. And Kevin Kiermaier obviously is a great defensive performer. And even if he is league average offensively, it's a big boost to this group with the defense he provides. So I think there are a lot of guys who can fill a lot of roles. Before we even get to the prospects that could help at some point in time. So as long as guys feel that, this is a deep lineup, I just have to do my job and get quality at bats, it's easier to pass the baton on to the next guy.
Now, who's the one guy, that you're excited about this year that if you had to, and of course it's a guesstimate, it always is, but the one guy that you think is really going to have a terrific year for the Rays?
I guess it's how do you compare terrific? Is it terrific based on what they did in the past? I think Austin Meadows is capable of something close to what he did in 2019. I think Randy Arozarena is capable of having a really good year. I think the same for Yandy. I think the good thing about there's probably 4 or 5 guys that would fit in that category. And that's when I think you have a really good team. And then I think the other guys in the lineup are all capable of being really good, good pieces of the puzzle. I think Manuel Margot, we're not quite sure who he is. He had to deal with a ton last year before spring training, just as spring training was started. He and his family were in a car accident where the rental on fire, and then father to COVID during the course of the year as well. And then he had the great postseason. And I couldn't imagine having to perform under those conditions and perform as well as he did. So had a terrific spring. So he's capable. I think there's probably 4, 5, 6 guys who are all capable of having better seasons than people project. And as long as you get a couple of them, if you get 2 out of 6 to perform, you're going to have a good year.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Neil, before I let you go, and, I'm not necessarily a predictor of numbers, but in maybe a quick 30-second summary, how do you see this year playing out for the Rays?
Well, I think the big question is going to be health. If their health is good, I think their depth is really good, and I think they're going to be a team that's going to be a postseason club. How good, I think, is hard to tell, but I really, after getting through spring training and seeing the quality of arms, the quality of athletes, the quality of baseball players, that they're going to be a good team this year, and I think they're going to be a lot of fun to watch.
Well, I agree with you. I can't wait till Thursday already in Miami. But Neil, Last question I always wanted to ask, I said there was one, but does the team, because I know you do a lot on DAE with the show of the week, which I want you to explain to people how they can follow you before I let you go, but do you ever get to travel with the team as a pre- and post-game host, or is it always where you're in Tampa?
Well, I sometimes, yes. I was at the World Series last year. Travel is a lot different in COVID terms.
Right.
In the past, yeah. I mean, in a normal year, Dave and Andy would do all the traveling, and there were times where I would join them. Like the year before in 19, I went to Toronto when they clinched, and went to Oakland for the wild card, and went to Houston. And then usually there was another trip or two that maybe during the season I would go to. And then generally when the team's on the road, I'm doing a lot of the work from Tropicana Field or other locations. In a COVID world, I think you've probably seen or read that most, and Dave will probably talk about this, most broadcast teams are broadcasting road games off monitors now,
Right.
whether they're on radio or television. And I think the hope is that it'll get back to normal as more people get vaccinated, and as the protocols, hopefully that means that, if the cases go down, the people get vaccinated, the protocols. And I think that's what we're all hoping. Obviously, if it's a really good year, I would hope that, we get to see it in person, and see the best moments, because, I think Dave and Andy did a tremendous job calling the World Series. And I think part of the reason they did such a great job is because they were able to do it in person. I think you pick up a little bit more, especially as a play-by-play guy, when you can see things that maybe the camera can't pick up.
Yeah, absolutely. And where can people follow you, Neil?
Sure. So they can follow at Neil Solondz on Twitter. I think that's probably where most of my social media that I put out there is on. I think that's, for me, the easiest way to just interact with fans. And then, and if they follow that or the Rays Radio account on Twitter, we put, a lot of podcasts out during the course of the year. And that's also a good way to just kind of keep up with us. And we've got a blog too, raysradio.mlblogs.com is a good way to kind of read what's going on with the club through the eyes of Rays Radio.
Well, a couple more days, my friend, and opening day is here. Looking forward to it, and want to thank you so much for taking your time to come on Frankly Speaking Sports tonight.
You got it, Larry. Thanks again for having me on.
All right, be safe.
You too.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that was the great Neil Solondz, the pre- and post-game show of the Tampa Bay Rays. We're going to take a quick 15-second break to allow our stations to identify themselves. And when we come back, we'll have the radio voice of the Tampa Bay Rays, Dave Wills.
You're listening to Frankly Speaking Sports with Larry Frank on Northeast Streaming Sports.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor, thrill, and pleasure to introduce to you the radio voice of the Tampa Bay Rays. Let's welcome in our good buddy, Dave Wills. Dave, how you doing tonight, buddy?
I'm doing pretty good. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on, Dave. I really do appreciate you coming on. Let me ask you, Dave, because I think we just had Neil Solondz on, and I wasn't sure about this. I know last year, due to COVID restrictions and things, you and Andy sometimes had to do your telecast or radio cast, whatever you like to call them, back in Tampa while the team was on the road. Is your wife going to get the luxury of having you away from the house this year, or is she going to have to still stick around with you for a little while?
You know what? She was able to enjoy a couple of weekends here during the spring because we did go down to Port Charlotte and also to Fort Myers to do games this year. But unfortunately, at least for the first half, we're going to be broadcasting all games from Tropicana Field. So, there's still some COVID protocols that they're trying to work through. I think they're still a little leery about adding a few more people to the planes. And quite honestly, too, Larry, it's a case where, when I'm on the road after a game is over, I like to be able to go out maybe for a beverage or two and enjoy a little bit of the city life wherever we're at, New York, Boston, Toronto, whatever the case may be. But unfortunately, because of COVID restrictions, really for now, the players and the staff are going to be restricted to going from the airplane to the bus to the hotel to a bus to the ballpark, back to a bus, back to the hotel. And so they're not really going to be able to get out and enjoy cities. And so if that's the case, I'd much rather be able to stay home here in the Tampa area and be able to broadcast the games from the Trop and still be able to do some things here in the state of Florida that we are so fortunate to be able to do.
And, you and I'd be great on the road because, seriously, that's what I am. You go to a game, you call the game, then you go for a beverage at a sports bar or local place that you don't have here in Tampa. I mean, do you get to do that with the guys that you actually brought, like Andy? I mean, you and Andy on radio seem great together, but you also seem different, like you have a different style than he on the road. Mm-hmm. I mean, how are you guys able to, it's amazing how well you guys work together. Not that either of you is a bad person when you're not on the air, but you just seem like different people.
Well, we are. We have different likes, but once we get into the booth, we have a lot of things that we do enjoy doing together. Obviously, it's a long season and it's a small booth. So if you don't get along with that guy, it makes for some very trying times throughout a long baseball season. But Andy and I do get together almost every single day for lunch on the road. That was kind of a routine that we would have. We would meet every day on the road, have lunch together. But then when it comes to post-game festivities, for me, I like to go out and have a beverage or two. So it's usually with a guy, one of our video coordinators, Chico Fernandez, and maybe one of the coaches or maybe even Kevin Cash. Andy, he still has some young kids at home. So he looks at this opportunity as being able to go back to a hotel, maybe turn on a show or watch something that he's DVR'd, and then be able to shut it down and get some sleep and some rest and quiet that he's not able to get at home. So, we do have different styles when it comes to away from the ballpark. But when it comes to, like I said, lunch every day, we get together. We do spend a lot of time together. He kind of jokes, and I agree, that we spend almost more time together during a baseball season than we do with our wives. And, we're fortunate that we do enjoy each other's company. But most of our going out is centered around lunchtime. My post-game festivities include going out for a beverage. His include going home and just chilling out and being able to get some rest and some peace and quiet.
Dave, a week from this weekend already, they don't even give us any time. The New York Yankees come into town actually for all home opener. And I know it's early. We're talking the second week of the series. Of the season. How big of a series is this for the Rays to set the tone like they did last year and say, you're not coming into our home and beating us?
I think for us fans and for maybe even us broadcasters, it probably is kind of a big series that way. But I think for the players, I think they proved to themselves last year, especially that, you win 8 out of 10 games against the Yankees during the regular season. All right. You showed that you could win at Yankee Stadium. Now, there weren't 50,000 people there. That could be a totally different beast if that ever comes to fruition here in 2021. But looking at this particular series here in 2021, yes, I think you want to also establish home field advantage. That's always something that's big. But for the players, I think they did a lot of their talking last year. You win 8 out of 10 games during the regular season. You win 5 best of 5 series in the postseason. I think the Rays last year proved that they were better. Now, again, today, like I said earlier on a show I was on, I for whatever reason, I watched Mad Dog. And I sit there and I give him the benefit of the doubt once I start the hour-long show. And then by the end of the show, I was ticked off because here he is, again, anointing the Yankees as the American League East champions, saying that the Toronto Blue Jays are probably the second best team, but then not only saying that we weren't going to be third place, picking the Red Sox to be third place and us fourth. And so, you could tell he didn't do his homework. You could tell he was not down in Port Charlotte. This team still has a mission. They realized they got close last year. They realized I don't want to say that the word came up short because I just think the Dodgers were a better team. They're a machine. But this team really did what they were supposed to do last year. And thankfully, they did beat the Yankees like they did 3 games to 2 in the playoffs. And I think right now, honestly, Larry, I think it's the other way around. I think the Yankees are probably thinking to themselves, they have to show that they can beat the Rays here in 2021, because the Rays showed that they beat the Yankees when they had to early and often in the regular season, and then when they had to in the postseason.
And Dave, I agree with you, because today I'm looking at, again, hopefully I'm looking at the projections, which I do this all the way up to the first game of the season. And you look at it, and I'm hoping something changed. I look at it, and you see every single projection, and I'm talking MLB Network guys, and you name them, all the writers in New York, they're picking the Yankees to win the AL East. Then I look at the teams from last year, and except for maybe the pitching staff, the starting pitching, there's not a lot of difference on either of these teams. So why is it, and not that I care, because as long as we keep winning, they can pick us last for all I care, but why don't the Rays get the recognition they deserve?
I meant to look this up because I always mess it up, but, we're not necessarily even just the sum of the parts. We don't have the superstar, and it's easy for the folks who are in the Northeast, who are the big, prognosticators of baseball, to look at the Rays and say, all right, yes, I know they made the World Series a season ago, but they let Blake Snell go and they let Charlie Morton go. There's no way they're a better team than they were in 2020. And it's hard to argue that point. It really is. And now you lose Nick Anderson probably for at least the first half of the season. And quite honestly, I'm going to be pleasantly surprised if he pitches at all here in 2021. But, so now, how can you blame him for thinking that the Rays aren't going to be as good as they were in 2020? But in Eric Neander, I trust, and our front office, I trust. The rest of the guys there, Kevin Cash does a tremendous job. And then obviously our coaching staff has been outstanding here over the last few years. I had a chance, obviously, to see these guys play for a month. I think they're going to be a good team. But I also think, Larry, that it's going to take maybe a little while. I've kind of compared it to my old my dad's old 69 Vista Cruiser station wagon that I grew up learning how to drive back in 1980 when it was already 11 years old. And it took a little while sometimes for that thing to warm up. By the time the Vista Cruiser did, it got the job done. And I think we're still trying to figure out how we're going to put all these pieces together in this pitching staff. People ask me all the time, who's our 5 guys that are going to be at the starting rotation? I'm not sure we're going to ever have a 5-man starting rotation. Well, then who are the 4 guys going to be? Well, I don't know if we're going to have 6. And somebody said, well, who's going to start most of your games? Well, Tyler Glasnow is going to start most of them, but if you held a gun to my head and said, is he going to start and that's all he's going to be? There might be some times where they want to pull back on some innings and just have him be a bulk guy and pitch maybe 3 innings and be a guy that fills in after an opener. So we're trying to figure out how to get close to 1,500 outs. I think it's 1,458 outs. You have to get 9 innings for 162 games. And that's how these guys are thinking. So I can understand why the big boys don't like us, because we don't have the big superstar power. But I still think we're in a team that's going to be in that 80, 88 range, maybe 92 win range, and still make the playoffs. We might not be able to do what the Yankees are doing, but I still think we're going to be a team that's going to be in the playoffs, and I'll take my chances against the Yankees every time we play them.
Oh, I agree with you on that. Now, you look at this team and you look at the depth, and I'm talking about the Rays here, and you look at this depth and you look like, so many players, so many infielders that can play the outfield position, which is terrific. And you look at the depth in the minor league system once the minor leagues finally do get going and things get back to organized play and all the different farmhands. But the question for you is, with this depth that we have, if Manuel Margot comes out and really starts playing well like he did in the playoffs, would you be surprised if the Rays tried to maybe throw Kevin Kiermaier's name out there with the depth they already have, if they feel that a closer or a solid Nick Anderson type pitcher is available at a low cost to them, where they can also eliminate the salary of Kevin Kiermaier?
Like I said many times with other people, my house does not have a for sale sign out in front of it right now. But if somebody were to walk up to me and offer me way more than what my house is worth, I'm going to be telling my wife we're going to be looking for a new place to live. I'm sure we don't have for sale signs on a lot of players right now or looking to trade them openly. But if somebody were to come and say, hey, we'll take this guy for you and move that piece for you, so you open a lane for a player, we're going to listen. And, Kevin's had a really, really good spring. I think that we value defense maybe a little bit more than a lot of other teams do. So I'm not sure that there's a lot of other teams out there that are going to offer what we think Kevin Kiermaier is worth to move him at what we think we should be able to get back to him. So with that being said, Manuel Margot was probably our second best player during the postseason a season ago when Randy Arozarena did everything that he did. And he's been a great player for us so far this spring. But maybe the guy who's also had just as good of a spring when he's been out on the field has been Kevin Kiermaier. So, Kiermaier is an elite defender. We've got a little stockpile there in shortstop. It's funny, though, just when you always think I just had my brother-in-law's here from Chicago, and he was asking me today, he said, hey, any chance you guys would trade Brian Meadows to the White Sox or Austin Meadows to the White Sox because we need a left fielder now? I said, we might be a little thick in the outfield spot right now, but I don't think we're that thick. So, it's one of those things where, again, if the right price came along, I'm sure Eric Neander would listen. But Kevin's an elite defender. Margot's a great defender. It's nice to have that kind of a situation right now because, as we all found out, you're maybe one foul tip off the foot. You're one bad misstep in the outfield or pulling a hamstring or twisting an ankle. In order to beat the Yankees and hang with the Yankees, you got to have some depth. And I know we've got some depth in the minor leagues. I'm sure Neil, I saw part of the interview as you guys were closing out. Nobody knows the minor leagues for the Tampa Bay Rays better than Neil Solondz. There's been times where even Eric Neander, when we've had meetings, would say, hey, Neil, where's this guy at? What's going on? So, we've got some depth right now, but I prefer right now to go into the 2021 season holding on to both Manuel Margot and Kevin Kiermaier. And I think that's the other thing that's going to be a key. We're going from 60 or /80 games because of the postseason last year to 162. We've got to keep those guys on the field. So those guys are going to get some rest. I don't think we're going to have too many guys on our team that are going to play 162 games.
Speaking of someone that at least the last week seems like he's hitting the ball much better is Yoshi Susago. How important and we know we can make all the excuses from last year. We know he came over from a different country, COVID hit, everything at once, and we know that. But is it important for him to get off to a fast start this year, or is it just go out there and whatever happens, happens?
Well, I think it is somewhat important. I really do, because especially with Kevin Cash announcing a couple of days ago that you might see Yoshi at the leadoff spot. And, you just – one of the things when the Rays have been going good, and you go back a couple of years ago when they really got off to a decent start, was they scored a lot of runs in the first inning. And when the Rays scuffled for a while last year, and we didn't scuffle all that long when you go 40-20, to be honest with you. But, we were putting up too many zeros in the first inning, and you allow pitchers to get settled in. So we need Yoshi to be good out of the gate. It was good to see him hit a home run today in Sarasota. I'm sure that makes him feel a little bit better. It was nice to see Willie hit a couple too. I think that's another big X factor for this team, because Willie needs to provide some offense to this team at the bottom part of the order. We can't have that bottom part of the order be an automatic black hole. And so we need Willie to do well. But Yoshi, I think, is going to be a key, especially with the concerns surrounding Ji-Man Choi right now. It sounds to me like they're going to have to go in there and look and see what's going on in that knee, because they've given cortisone shots. They've given him rest. They've tried different things. I think the next step will probably be they'll have to go in and at least do an exploratory look to see what's happening. And honestly, Ji-Man Choi for the last few years too has been a notoriously slow starter. So I think Yoshi being a year into this now, a little more comfortable, all the things you said, but I think they were all true. I mean, we're not making excuses for the guy. You come over from a different country, a new league. You come into the American League East. I think we found that out over the last few years too, Larry, is that, you've got guys that have even come from the National League West and the American League Central or whatever. They come over to the American League East, and it's a beast on every single night. I mean, it might not be so much so against the Orioles this year, but it's usually a pretty good battle. So I think he's got all that under his belt this year. I think he's a lot more comfortable. I think he's really geared up and ready to go here in 2021, and we're going to need him to get off to a good start.
Yeah, Dave, when you talk about a quick start and, analytical thing, and I'm not, this particular situation, I'm not, it's not just the Blake Snell thing that I'm bringing up, but you've watched the game, you've seen the game, you've been old school baseball. You now got Tony La Russa back with your former team, the White Sox.
Mhm.
I mean, when you look at the game of baseball, and we know it's no secret that it became so analytic, but do you think a lot of these coaches have taken the human element out of the game, and maybe Tony hopefully can bring some of that back? Or do you think that analytics, they're overusing it too much? And let me explain what I mean real quickly by that. Analytics don't have emotions. They don't have feelings. You don't know how they're doing. You don't know how the day was. I mean, there's a lot of things that plays in it. I don't know if you ever got to see the great movie with Tom Hanks called Sully, where he was the captain of he landed in the Hudson.
Absolutely.
And when they're doing his investigation, he says, but how about the human side of it? Do you think managers have gone away from using that human part of it?
It's a constant battle. And I think, again, even going back, and I know Kevin took a lot of heat for Game 6. And even when that happened, both Andy and I looked at each other and said, we don't believe this is the correct move. But the thing is, the human element about that move was that Kevin Cash was staying consistent with what he did all season long. Now, you can argue till the, cows come home whether or not that was not the right move because it didn't work out. I mean, and you look at it that way. But one of the reasons why the Rays are so good is I think they combine both of them. They combine the human element with the analytics. They take the analytics and they tell Pete Fairbanks, you know how you can be better? By throwing this fastball here and then mixing this curveball in at this zone. And then they build up the confidence in these guys so that they feel better when they're on the mound. Again, when pitching, for me and for anybody else, it's all about conviction. It's all about confidence. Cody Reed has just talked about how he feels a heck of a lot more confident pitching for this Rays team because he's not looking over his shoulder wondering if he's going to be sent down if he makes a bad pitch. I think the perfect example of this combination of analytics and also the human element is Pete Fairbanks. Pete Fairbanks was just a hard thrower when he was with the Texas Rangers. The Rays made a trade for him. They worked on a couple different things. They tweaked a couple things thanks to analytics. And then when he went out there and they didn't work right away, Kevin Cash stuck with him. And I go back to a series against the Dodgers in 2019. We were playing at Dodger Stadium. We're trying to hold onto a playoff spot at that particular time. We lose a tough game to the Dodgers in the first game of that series. And Pete Fairbanks gets pretty much lit up. And then in the next game, it's a tight game, back and forth the entire evening. And next thing you know, here's Pete Fairbanks pitching in extra innings in a high leverage situation. You could almost see the heart beating out of his chest, out of his uniform. That's how nervous he was. And yet he got the job done. And Pete Fairbanks has not been the same pitcher ever since that particular moment. He elevated himself to a different level because of the human element of Kevin Cash believing in him and coming back to him. So, Joe Madden was one of the first guys to start incorporating a lot of the analytics, and everything started to kind of drift this way. Joe Madden is now trying to push that arrow back this way. And he was talking about that with Tony La Russa last year when he was a special assistant with the Angels. So now that La Russa's manager of the Chicago White Sox, Tony was one of the first guys to incorporate a lot of the computer stuff. I think there has to be a happy marriage between the two. Why would you want to – we're in such a society right now, Larry, where it seems to be you have to be one thing or another. You have to be a Democrat or a Republican. You have to be a blue or a red. You have to be this or you have to be that. What's wrong with meeting in the middle? And I think that's the same thing with analytics and also with, again, knowing that these guys are not robots, that there's a heartbeat involved. Let's meet in the middle. Let's use the eyeballs of the scouts. Let's pay attention to what's happening in the game so that it's not scripted out at the beginning of the game. And that's not what happened with Kevin. That was just consistency. So,
Right.
Just kind of feel what's happening in the game and go from there, but also utilize all that information that you have at your disposal.
Dave, how do you see this pitching staff playing out? I mean, do we have now we can look at the names, but I mean, we still look like we got a good group of guys in our bullpen, even with the injury to Nick. And that doesn't count some of the guys that we still have, that we had to send down.
Mm-hmm.
But the starting staff, I mean, they said they're going to start with a 4 or 5 man rotation and then play it by ear, which we know if it works, great. But we got 2 guys specifically that I've seemed to be pretty impressed with during spring training that aren't getting a lot, and that's fine. Let's keep them under the radar. But one is Michael Walker, who had some great years with the St. Louis Cardinals, and another one is our old friend, Archer, Chris Archer, who, if I'm correct and you can correct me, I don't think he was around when Snyder was around, or if he was, it was maybe for just a year. Yeah. I mean, could this be where, both guys, could surprise us?
Waka, I've been really, really impressed with what he's done so far this spring, and been able to see him pitch a couple of times. Unfortunately, because of the COVID, and Chris pitched a couple of games during the week, and then he's pitched on the backfields a couple of times. I haven't seen him, but my hope for Chris Archer is that Chris Archer goes back to being just wanting to be Chris Archer, the pitcher, not Chris Archer, the ace, not Chris Archer, the team leader, not Chris Archer, the face of the franchise. And not look at me. This is I want to be the guy, Chris Archer. He's done everything. He's answered every question the way he's supposed to. According to Kevin Cash, he's listening and he's doing what he is supposed to on the mound. I want to make sure he pitches with conviction with his fastball. Doesn't run away from pitches. And we've heard even in a couple of the quotes from Mark Topkin and the Tampa Bay Times that he has understood that a little bit better here going forward. So. I'm intrigued by him. I'm intrigued by Rich Hill. I like the pickup of Chris Archer. I really did. So I'm hoping that, again, he could be a good solid number 3, number 4, piggyback guy, whatever you want to call. We talked to Eric Neander at the beginning of the year. And again, I don't think we're going to be – we're still trying to find ourselves pitching-wise here going into this season, even as we speak. And I think that we're going to be a much better team come June when we get this ball, as I said, with that Vista Cruiser kind of – everything's starting to come together. I think there's still so many moving pieces that they're still trying to figure things out. But are we going to have a 5-man rotation? We're going to have 6 guys. Is Chris Archer going to start? Is he going to be a bulk guy? All those things are going to be. It's just such a menagerie of so many things that are going to happen here in these first couple of weeks and first couple of months of the season that I really think that if we are anywhere near the top come June, when you start thinking about Luis Patino, and then also Shane McClanahan coming up from the minor leagues. Josh Fleming is a guy who's done everything he was supposed to do this spring to make the team. And ultimately, because we're looking for maybe a little shorter relief guys, I want to keep guys stretched out. He can be there to help us. Brent Honeywell. I mean, the thickness of this team, it used to be when we played spring training games, you had the starters, and then you had the guys who came in and they were down here. The guys that came in over the last couple of weeks, I mean, they're right on the heels of the guys that we have at the big league level. This team has some thickness that they haven't seen in my time here, and this is my 17th season coming up of Rays baseball. So there should be a lot to be pumped up about by Rays fans, but I think it might take a little while for everything to kind of come together because of the fact that we don't have the true 5-man rotation. These guys are really trying to figure out what the best way is to go about going from 60 games or 80 games in a postseason to 162 games. And making sure that by the time September comes around, we still have some gas left in the tank to do some damage in the postseason.
How weird is it going to be 30 minutes away having the Blue Jays playing?
It's going to be a little different. I was looking at our schedule. We don't go there till the end of May. And that's what I was kind of wondering too. I wonder if we're going to be able to broadcast from Dunedin and do the games there as opposed to having to stay at the Trop. But it will be a little different. We've become kind of Canada South here for the last few months with the Raptors moving over to Tampa Bay and playing downtown Tampa, and now the Blue Jays playing in Dunedin. Like I said, it would have been more interesting maybe if we had been on their schedule a few more times during the first half of the season. But, I think it's going to be a lot of fun for the folks in Dunedin, and I think they're also going to find out too maybe how tough it's going to be to play some baseball games maybe in June, and if they stick around into July when it starts to get warm and humid and rainy in this area. But, hopefully, again, I'm all for getting back to Toronto. Toronto's one of my favorite cities to go to. Not that I don't dislike Dunedin. I love going to the VFW right across the way. Those are some great people over there, and downtown Dunedin's a heck of a lot of fun to go to as well. And Frenchie's Outpost over there. So if they're still playing here when we play at the end of May against them, I'm hoping we're broadcasting games from that ballpark.
Now, a question comes up with that, Dave. All the vaccination, I don't know what they told you or have not told you yet, but is there a chance that if all the players get vaccinated, and including the staff, I'm talking broadcasters and personnel as well, by mid-season, because we know it's out there for everyone now, is there a chance they try to work back to normal? When I say normal, I'm talking about 2019, letting you guys go to ballparks, allowing more fans in the stands and so on?
I think so. I think, that right now is what we're hearing. I mean, we're hearing some of the talk that the NBA is really been pushing that here over the last few weeks, trying to get more, at least a certain amount of a very high percentage. What is it, 80-85% of the players vaccinated, so that they can start loosening some of the restrictions. Now, it's easier with an NBA team because you only have 12, 15, I'm not even sure what their roster is anymore, players, and a lot smaller staff. Now, with baseball, you're not only talking about the 26 players that are on the active roster, but you're also probably talking about the 40-man roster that comes into play, and then all the auxiliary staff and coaches that travel. So that's a lot more people if you're trying to get to that 80-85% plateau to get guys to do what they want to do. But I read the Houston Astros were supposed to fly straight to the Bay Area for their first games this week, but they're stopping off in Houston to get a lot of the players vaccinated. So I'm sure there's going to be maybe a certain amount of peer pressure, because guys, it's just unnatural there. You're starting to hear more and more stories about how guys, when last season was over, and it was only 60 games, how when the season was over, after they were, restrained to just staying in hotel rooms and not being able to even go out when they were home, that the emotions and everything just boiled over. We've heard stories from Nick Anderson about that and Ryan Thompson already, and I'm sure there's many more stories out there that haven't been told. Now, that was for a 60-game schedule, or, as I said, for the postseason, 20 more games. For 162 games to be relegated to a 400-square-foot hotel room, 80, 90 nights out of the year, and you can't go anywhere else, that's unnatural for these guys. And it's not good either for their mental state to be able to let some steam off on occasion, like they probably need to do, and see family, and to be able to hug your aunt and uncle who might be in a town that you're visiting, but you can't go see them. So I would hope that these guys are really taking a long look and a long listen to whoever might be telling them that they should or shouldn't get the vaccination, to hopefully get us a heck of a lot closer to normalcy, because I'm ready for that. And I'm sure a lot of other players are ready for that too.
Dave, before I let you go, you already answered how many games you think this team was capable of winning. You said 88-92. So I'm going to ask you a question that I've been dying to ask you for a couple of times that you've been on, and I'm finally going to ask it as we end, because you can always shut me off after that, I guess. But, you're in a two-man play-by-play booth. What I mean by that is I grew up watching, when I was a kid, Bob Murphy, Lindsey Nelson, Ralph Kiner, and they switched off like you and Andy do in the booth. You have to have times where there's a play, like let's say game 162, where Andy gets to make that call and you don't. I mean, how does that work out, and how frustrating can that be sometimes? Because, you have dreams as a kid. Come on, to call this, and on the second part of the question, is there ever anything that you have yet to be able to call, when I say that, like a no-hitter, a World Series, this or that in your career, that you have yet to be able to call?
It's funny because you look back and, we do switch off, and every other game he starts or I start. So, we've called many a no-hitters. He's called the Matt Garza no-hitter, so the only one in Rays history. We've both called the perfect games. I called the Mark Burley one, Dallas Braden. You sit there. I called the ground ball to Aki to wrap up the 2008 league championship against the Boston Red Sox. He called the fly ball last year to Manuel Margot. I had the Dan Johnson home runs that were improbable. And then he called the Brent Phillips play in the World Series that was improbable as well. So I don't sit there and I've never played back a call that Andy did and thought, I wonder how I would have done it. Most of the time he's probably done it a lot smoother than I have. I might get a little more excited, might get a little more loud than Andy does, but when it comes to crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's, Andy's as good as it gets. So, it's not a competition. It never has been. And I think that's one of the reasons why our booth works so well, because I think, Larry, honestly, and you bring up a great point. I think there are booths that guys do get jealous of the other guy getting a chance to call those particular plays. I watched a special on Jack Buck a number of years ago, and I was shocked to hear that I guess Harry Carey would move him out of the play-by-play mic to call a big moment in games back when Harry was the so-called lead guy, when it was him and calling Cardinal games way back in the 50s and 60s, which is amazing. You're talking about two Hall of Famers, Jack Buck and Harry Carey, and Harry would move Jack out of the way to call a big moment. So, there's no points, there's no additional funds heading in either one of our banking accounts who calls the bigger moment. And, it's just worked out tremendously. Like I said, it's two guys who enjoy what they're doing, realize that what we do beats working for a living. And I just hope the only thing, again, we haven't been able to call a World Series winner yet. And whoever gets the chance to call it, I'll be happy, because we are getting a new ring this week. That's going to be a real nice, shiny new ring. That's going to be another American League Championship ring. But I'm still holding out for the one that's just a little bigger. And hopefully we get one of those here in the very, very near future.
I hope so. Well, listen, Dave, as always, I want to thank you so much for taking time to join us on Frankly Speaking Sports. Hopefully, we'll wait a little bit, but hopefully somewhere towards the middle of the season, once you guys get acclimated, we'll love to have you back on.
Anytime, Larry. Thanks for having me so much. This was a blast.
All right. Be safe, Dave.
Thanks, you too.
That was Dave Wills, the radio play-by-play announcer for your Tampa Bay Rays. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. We went a couple of minutes over. I do apologize. Want to thank Zodiac TV and everybody else for joining us today. We'll be back Wednesday, 9 p.m. Eastern Time on another episode of Frankly Speaking Sports. Good night.